Good day, students. Now, in line with our discussion about structures of globalization, we have come to another structure where the modern world system on how this modern world system is aligned with the contemporary world and globalization. When we are talking about modern world system, it is a kind of structure of which countries and states are divided mainly on their capital inflow and outflow. What does it mean? It was Immanuel Wallerstein, an American sociologist and economic historian, who discovered in 1974 the world system approach, or commonly known as the modern world system approach. What does it mean by the modern world system? As you can see in the map is colored, the countries are colored on three different colors. You can see the yellow, the green, and the orange. These are what we call as the modern world system, where the world is divided based on their capital. That is why, according to Immanuel Wallerstein, modern world system is specifically called as the capitalist world economy, with capitalism as defined as the endless accumulation of capital, meaning to say that the world is divided mainly because of their economic globalization. This is the division of the world. Thus, it undergoes only in the first world, third world, or second world countries. Sociologists would claim that it can also be labeled as developing or developed countries. Another definition of the modern world system is that it is a geographical division of labor, meaning to say that the world is divided mainly on their geographical division, which the world is divided based on how could they produce products on the basis of their capacity as a what? As a country or as a state. Now, while the basic linkage is economic, take note, the basic linkage and understanding the modern world system is economic. It is also reinforced with political and cultural factors. Take note of the structures of globalization. We have three structures, which is the political, the economical, and the social globalization, of which this three has placed in what we call as the modern world system. So here, basically, if we are talking about modern world system, it is mainly economic. However, there is a political factor here. Why? Because as a state or as a country, you place cooperation with each other. And thus, how can you cooperate economically if you don't have political, right? Another is the modern world system is a system that which divides the world and the nations and the areas of the world into three parts. We all know that sociologists claimed that the world is divided accordingly to the first world, second world, or third world countries. However, Immanuel Wallerstein divided the world into what we call as the tripartite world system. By the term tripartite, he claimed that the world is divided into three. It designated the core, the peripheral, and the semi-peripheral as being the world's division. Later, we will know what are this division all about. In the past, some areas remained to be external to the system. Take note, even though Immanuel Wallerstein claimed that the world is divided into three, there are still countries and states that is not part of this tripartite world system, and they are called as the external system. Okay? So now, let us try to look on how Immanuel Wallerstein divided or made the tripartite world system. So let us start with the core. What does it mean by the core? As you can see in the map, the color blue represents the countries which is part of the core. What does it mean by the core? The core are what we call as the first world countries. These are countries that are powerful, wealthy, and highly independent of outside control. They can manage their economic, their political, and their social globalization within their territories. So meaning to say they're powerful, they're wealthy, they can accumulate and they can give wealth to other countries. They dominate the capitalist world system. What does it mean by dominate the capitalist world system? Some of the transnational and multinational corporations are found on the core. Like for example, the Starbucks, the Nike and whatsoever multinational and transnational corporations are found on the core. And these are the countries from Japan, Canada, United States of America, Australia, New Zealand, and Northwestern Europe, which includes the United Kingdom, Sweden, Norway, and etc. That is part of the Northwestern Europe. These are countries that is what we call as the core. Now, from the first world countries, which is the core, let's try to go below or go down. Let's go to the periphery. The periphery, which are the red ones, which is considered as the third world countries. The countries that lack strong central governments and controlled by other states. These are countries that exported raw materials to the core. Going back to the definition of the periphery, these countries are what? Controlled by other states. They may not be controlled physically, but they are controlled economically because these countries are dependent with other countries such as the core. They rely their economic situation based on the economic stability and economic balance of the core. Now, periphery relied on the coercive labor practices and heavily exploited. Meaning to say, in the modern world system, the most exploited ones are the periphery, countries that is part of the third world countries, because we exported the raw materials. We can see here the farmers, the miners, those of what we call as the laylayan. Those people, those countries that gives the raw materials to the core. Now, what are these countries? These countries are the Philippines, Russia, African countries, Asia, and some Latin American countries such as Colombia, Chile, Uruguay, and Peru. These are countries that are part of the periphery. And we still believe that we are still part of the periphery because Philippines, as one of our example, is considered as one of the exporting countries of raw materials in terms of coal, in terms of metals, and many other raw materials that we can see here. Now let's try to go in between of the core and the periphery, which is what we call as the semi-periphery. The semi-periphery are what we call as the second world countries. These are countries that lies in the two extremes. What does it mean by the two extremes? Meaning to say the most powerful and those underdeveloped countries, which is the periphery. They are the buffers, meaning to say whatever happens in the core and the periphery, it would have a bigger impact on the between, which is the semi-periphery. They are being the exploiting or being the exploited. Now, how does the semi-periphery becomes the exploiting? Semi-periphery countries becomes the exploiting when they are trying to exploit countries from the periphery. When they become exploited because countries from semi-periphery was being exploited by the core. That is why they become buffers. They either be exploiting or becomes the exploited. Now, what are these countries? These are countries from Latin America, which are Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Iran, India, China, South Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So these are countries of which in between, as you can see, China is part of the semi-periphery. Some of the sociologists would claim that the core are the developed countries and semi-peripheries are the developing countries, and the periphery are the underdeveloped. So these are just terminologies that would help us understand how the world exchanges in terms of economic proportionates. Now, there is what we call as not part of the three, but they are called as the external areas. The external areas are countries that maintain their own economic system and thus they manage to remain outside of the modern world system, meaning to say they are the introverted countries. They are the countries that do not let each other being exploited by one another. So they are limited with foreign commercial influence, meaning to say they lock their own countries in terms of foreign influences so that they can mobilize themselves in better economic prosperity. What these countries are: Russia, Iceland, Western Sahara, Suriname, and lastly is the North Korea. These are countries that is part of the external areas of the modern world system. All right. So to better understand this one, let's try to look this phone. This phone. This iPhone is being one of the materials in terms of economic distribution. How does the iPhone becomes relevant on the modern world system, or the phone to be exact? The modern world system tries to better understand that your iPhone, the raw materials of this phone was been gathered in the Philippines. The raw materials such as the metals, the alloys, and other components of these phone. Now, after the periphery gathered the raw materials, then the raw materials will be transferred to the semi-periphery. Then the semi-periphery is now the manufacturing component of the modern world system, of which is now trying to manufacture the raw materials in becoming a phone. Now, since the raw materials now will be transferred to the semi-periphery, such as China, which has a manufacturing company of this phone, then this phone will now, after it becomes this one, then it will be delivered to the core, which is found the multinational or the transnational corporations that the phone is being gathered. That's why the core now gets the credit, the label of having this phone. That's why the core has now the power to distribute this phone all over the world. That is why you're trying to ask why iPhones are very expensive. One of the very reason is that it's its process in becoming an iPhone is very tedious, and thus it's very long, and it gets more income to do it. So that's it. That's how simple the modern world system lies in. So if you have to tackle about modern world system, it's simply how cooperation, and that lies the political globalization. And when there is cooperation, there is what we call as economic globalization that happens there when you have now sharing of resources and income on it. So there is what we call as economic, and thus through cooperation, we maintain our social globalization on that matter. So that's it. That's what the modern world system by Immanuel Wallerstein. I hope you learned something. If you have questions, you may feel free to comment down below. If you have corrections, feel free to correct and comment down below. Thank you so much. This has been Sam Cairo Carrillo Dumanlag, your teacher for the contemporary world. Thank you and God bless us all.